Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Felia Zumarnis, and I'll be your MC for today's event. I am highly honored and feel privileged to have been given the opportunity to address everyone on this very special occasion. And for all of our speakers, we pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. I'm from Kedereka, a platform built under the Ministry of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology here in Indonesia to democratize the access of innovation between researchers and industries. And for your information, Kedereka has been collaborating with CSIRO as a partner of one of the universities here in Indonesia to accelerate some innovations since 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, today's event is an Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative-led regional event co-hosted by CSIRO and the Indonesian Ministry of Education, Culture, Research, and Technology. This webinar aligns to CSIRO's Ending Plastic Waste Mission and the Indo-Pacific Plastic Innovation Network. Now, as you know that it's Plastic-Free July, and reducing plastic pollution is a key focus across the globe. We have some exciting and inspiring speakers here who will be presenting today, including the founder of Plastic-Free July. The movement has inspired for more than 100 million participants in 190 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, we will have two sections during the webinar to answer any questions. If you would like to submit any questions, please submit your questions in the question function. We also have a chat function on this platform to share any thoughts. But if you do have a question that you would like to address, please submit using the question function. Everyone, now you can use the chat function, and we would really love to hear where you are dialing in, so feel free to add it to the chat. Also, the webinar will be recorded, and it will be made available through CSIRO's Ending Plastic Waste website over the coming weeks. Ladies and gentlemen, before the speakers are introduced to you, we are very fortunate today to be joined by a very special opening speaker, Dr. Tun Asha. Dr. Tun Asha is from the National Center for Coastal Research, Government of India. Dr. Asha has 25 years of experience in the field of geoinformatics, satellite data processing, coastal zone management, coastal hazard, and vulnerability mapping and modeling and capacity building. Could you please welcome, wherever you are listening to this webinar, Dr. Tun Asha for the opening remarks. Dr. Asha, the time and screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining and a warm welcome to the webinar on Plastic-Free July from deep space to deep sea. Our discussion comes at a particularly important time. Global plastic production has increased exponentially, and over the past 60 years, this growth is expected to continue at the rate of around 4% annually. Unfortunately, mismanaged plastic waste that leaks into the ocean is a major threat to the marine ecosystem and ocean economics. Already, plastic is present in all the oceans and its various compartments from shore to deep sea, remote islands, and to the poles. The challenges of marine plastic debris as a global menace affecting the world ocean was recognized at the 14th ESA summit held at Bangkok, Thailand on November 2019. As the problem is transboundary in nature, a need for a strategic action plan was also realized. Recognizing the increasing threat from plastic debris to the environment, biodiversity, economy, and human health, and gaining on the momentum gained from the recent EAS Marine Plastic Debris Workshop, we are pleased to be co-hosting this Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative-led regional event. This webinar is an opportunity to expand the network, partnership, and also create awareness to support Plastic-Free July. As you all know, India has banned the use of single-use plastics from this July, since this has got very low utility and high littering potential across the country. As India is also a signatory to the UN Coastal Clean Seas campaign, we have adopted a number of campaigns to clean the coast, and NCCR is very much part of this Clean Swachh Bharat campaign. This year, India celebrates the 75th year of Indian independence, and in this connection, large coastal cleanup programs are organized during the International Coastal Cleanup Day. and it is proposed to clear the coast of huge marine debris and garbage to give relief to the marine life and people staying in the coastal areas. During this webinar, we will be listening to experts from Australia, the Indo-Pacific, and the USA, and how each country is tackling the marine plastic waste menace through a range of solutions. An important outcome of this program will be guiding our ongoing and future work in managing plastic pollution, and I hope we continue working together in tackling the serious challenge and ensuring the sustainability of our oceans. Thank you very much, and I wish the workshop all success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asha, for your wonderful welcoming speech. Ladies and gentlemen, now I would like to introduce you to the founder of Plastic Free July, Rebecca Prince Ruse. Rebecca founded the Plastic Free July in 2011 with a goal to make difference by changing her behavior around single-use plastics. Hello, Rebecca. Thanks for joining us. Are you ready?
Yep, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon, Rebecca. Thanks for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rebecca Prince Ruse.
Thank you very much. And look, I'm so honoured to be here and to be part of this webinar about a plastic-free July from deep space to deep sea. And I think the reason that Plastic-Free July has grown from just myself and 40 other people in the city of Perth in Western Australia, where I live, back in 2011, to now a global environmental movement, is really because there's been this growing awareness over the last decade in particular that plastic is everywhere. We know it is from the bottom of the deepest ocean trenches to the tops of Mount Everest and everywhere in between. And Plastic Free July has really grown as a movement, as a way for people to take action on this plastic pollution problem that we are all increasingly familiar with and aware of. And it isn't, it's about action, it's not about awareness. And so last year, we know that around the world, 140 million people took part, and it's not just people making changes in their behaviours in their own lives, but also in their communities, in their workplaces. Now businesses get on board, brands get on board, corporates get on board, and governments are introducing legislation. So I'm just going to spend the next few minutes sharing the story of Plastic Free July, how people can get involved, how we have seen change being made, and share that story as an invitation, even though it is almost the end of July. We always say the best day to start is today, to share what we've been doing as a thought for how others in the region and beyond can get involved in making a difference to our consumption. And as Usha has just mentioned, plastic production is increasing exponentially. And unfortunately, our waste management and our collection and recycling systems haven't kept pace. And yes, that is important. We need to fix our waste management systems, improve our recycling. The Global Plastic Treaty to end plastic pollution is going to be a critical part of that. Cleanups were previously mentioned, they are also important, but we cannot expect to recycle or clean up our way out of this problem. We have to reduce consumption and production. So I'm just going to try and share my screen just so I can share a few photos with you. Just checking that's okay. Yeah, thank you. So Plastic Free July, although we say plastic free, we're actually helping to end plastic waste, and that's the waste that's in our landfills, it's in our environment, and unfortunately increasingly in the bodies of people and also our wildlife. And so this, we are a not-for-profit, and it is now a global social movement. And we know each year that we stop around 300 million kilograms of plastic polluting the world, and we do this through sharing solutions so people can take action, and together we make a difference. It has become this global moment for people to take action, whether that be in their own lives. We see brands making announcements about their plastic packaging. We see communities running events. We have a lot of local government and jurisdictions using this month as an opportunity to really take action and engage the wider community. So this is from our website. We are very much focused on the solutions. People join in during July, but we know that 84% of our participants make one or more changes that come habits or a way of life. So it is beyond July. And we work very closely with a behavioural scientist, and we know that people are aware of the problem and they're concerned. They want to know what to do about it. So the challenge is very much about sharing solutions, sharing alternatives to single-use plastics, helping people remember, and sharing ideas of how people have taken the challenge further, what people are doing in schools, what they're doing in their workplaces and their communities. And that's been very much formed from our behaviour change research, and people have said we know about the problem, we care about this plastic pollution problem, we want to know what to do about it, and we want to know what others like us are doing. So this is also a request from us to hear your stories about what's happening in your country, in your organisation, because we really believe that together we're greater than the sum of the parts. So please share with us your stories for Plastic Free July, or for tackling plastic waste in your area. We share stories of individuals, of local businesses, of councils, of governments, and of corporates. Whether that's businesses in India. This is a social enterprise called Refillable that is offering household cleaning products in refills. It's a social enterprise that has started with the local waste pickers association in several countries there. We see corporates using Plastic Free July as an opportunity to audit the plastics across their operations and supply chains, look at their procurement policies, and look for opportunities to tackle their plastic waste, as well as, really importantly, and I've enjoyed seeing that in the CSIRO amongst your employees over the years, that it becomes a great thing for people to get their staff and their workplace on board in taking action. And what the solutions and the change looks like is very different for all of us, depending on where we live, what our alternatives are, what the plastics are that we're using. And so that's why for us, sharing stories and of examples of what others do is so important. And what we see is that through empowering individuals and sharing and empowering behaviour change, and then sharing those stories, we see this ripple effect. And the result is having this systemic change that is driven by this groundswell of community engagement. And small changes do add up to a collective impact. So we know that last year 140 million people around the world took part. We know they together avoided 300 million kilos of plastics, and that's just in their home, and together 2.1 billion tonnes of waste. We also, through our research, measure the public's attitude and policies and the waste issue, and there's very high levels of public support for action to reduce plastic waste by consumers, producers, retailers, and government. And one of the things that we did ahead of the UN Environment Assembly meeting was to do a global survey on attitudes to a global legally binding treaty, and we were able to feed it was the result of almost 90% of people worldwide supported that global treaty. And so I think it's really important that we understand that the changes that happen at this level of civic society is really important in those critical legislative changes there. This year, we're really focusing on the single-use coffee cup. We know in many countries, including Australia and the US, it's the cups, even paper cups, are lined with plastic. The lids are plastic, and it's now the #1 single-use plastic item in many countries. And what we're doing with the challenge that we're running this week is to encourage people to bring their own cup, borrow one from a cup exchange scheme, or sit and stay. And that's a really important to, as we transition from single-use plastics, be mindful of not just replacing single-use plastics with single-use materials of other types. And because everything has a footprint, and that point of waste avoidance that I made at the outset is really critical. I think it's a very auspicious day to be holding this webinar. It is unfortunately on the 28th of July, Earth Overshoot Day. It is the day when humans, we have used all of the biological resources that the Earth regenerates during the entire year. And I think that single-use plastic is synonymous with the throwaway society that we have become, and taking part in Plastic Free July is an opportunity to change the way that we are using and consuming resources. So thank you very much. And apologies, I'm not sure why my camera isn't working, but couldn't figure that out while I was talking, so apologies for that.
Yeah, no worries, Rebecca. Thank you so much, and thank you for your efforts for plastic waste, Rebecca. We are very inspired. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Professor Christopher Ruff. Chris Ruff is the Frederick Bartman Collegiate Professor of Climate and Space Science at the University of Michigan and is the principal investigator of the NASA Cyclone Global Navigation Satellite System mission. Chris is currently joining us from the USA. So thank you so much, Chris, for dialing in as it is in the middle of the night for you. Chris, the time and screen is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to participate in this meeting. I was happy to stay up late for it because this work is very important to me. So I'm going to present a new technique that we're developing to try to image the concentration distribution of ocean microplastics from space and to resolve some of the temporal dynamics of the concentration. It uses a new type of satellite radar designed to measure ocean winds. And get this going, yeah. So the name of the NASA mission is Cygnus, and the original intent of the mission was to measure winds over the ocean, in particular in tropical cyclones and typhoons. It does this by measuring the roughness of the ocean surface with the radar scattering, and then from the roughness you can infer the wind speed. There's 8 satellites in this constellation. Each satellite is in a low inclination orbit to spend its time mostly over the tropics, and the radars are a new type of radar that uses standard GPS navigation signals as the transmitter, and then our satellites have modified GPS receivers that act as radar receivers. And by looking at the change in the GPS signal, we can measure the ocean roughness. And this is just an example of 1 day of ocean wind measurements made by the satellite earlier this year. And you can see there's several places here where there are storms this day, and those are the yellow and red parts. But most of the ocean is not stormy most of the time, and those are the blue, the light blue areas. And what we did for the microplastic problem was to look at the regions where it wasn't stormy and we had calm winds, relatively calm winds, and we compared the roughness measurements made by Cygnus of the ocean with model predictions of what the roughness should be given ocean model predictions of the winds. And the difference between the roughness that we measure with our satellite and the roughness predicted from model winds is the roughness anomaly. And it turns out that the anomaly in the roughness, which is how much less rough the ocean is than it should be for a given wind speed, that anomaly turns out to be highly correlated with the concentration of ocean microplastics at that location. And this is a reference to a publication that I did with a student of mine recently. This top plot is a plot of the average anomaly and roughness over an entire year, and then the bottom plot below it is a model of the ocean microplastic concentration everywhere in the world based on an ocean circulation model. And we took these two plots and just point by point compared them one to the other, and the result is this plot on the right that shows the strong negative correlation between roughness anomaly and the concentration of microplastics. And this negative region right in here is where the more microplastic concentration there is, the less rough the ocean surface is for a given wind speed. And it's that relationship that we use to derive the microplastic concentration distributions from the radar measurements. And this is an example of a validation of this. The top plot is it's the sort of accumulation of all surface truth measurements of microplastic concentration by net trawls over several decades. And you can see actually there's a lot of parts of the ocean that have never been sampled or are sparsely sampled. And then the bottom is an annual estimate of the ocean microplastic concentration from our radar measurements. And they're generally similar features. The major North Pacific gyre, the garbage patch, and the North Atlantic gyre, the South Atlantic gyre, they all show up in the net trawl data and also in our measurements. But because the satellites are running all the time and taking data all the time, we can then take these annual measurements and break them up into smaller time zones or time intervals to look at temporal dynamics. And this is an example of that. These are the changes in the microplastic distribution day by day over an entire year. And what you see is strong seasonal dependence in the concentration, where in general the concentrations are higher in the summer and lower in the winter in both hemispheres. And this is an example of a validation of that, where we've broken up our measurements by month in the North Pacific and the South Pacific. And you can see there's a much higher concentration in the North Pacific summer and in the South Pacific summer. And then on the right are again those same net trawl data broken up by month. And in the net trawl data as well, there's higher concentrations in the summer and lower in the winter. And one last thing that we can measure with this by zooming in on individual river outflows. This is the outflow of the Yangtze River into the East China Sea. This top plot here is the average ocean microplastic concentration over an entire year, and you can't really see anything. But then we went through the year of data 1 week at a time, and we picked out the 3 weeks when you could see the strongest outflow. And in particular, this one on the top right here, you can see that there's a very strong outflow from the mouth of the Yangtze out into the East China into the East China Sea here, and then some weaker outflow in these other weeks. But anyway, this is a way to resolve these temporal dynamics of the outflow. Then one last thing that we're doing now is to validate this, the underlying physics behind why the presence of the material in the water suppresses the roughness. We're doing wave tank experiments at the University of Michigan. This is a wave tank that we have here it's normally used for designing better shapes for propellers and ships and things, but we're using it for this problem, where we blow wind across the water, We measure the roughness of the surface with these ultrasonic altimeters, and then we add different amounts of surfactants and microplastics to the water and look at the effect. And this is a plot of an example of one of the plots of the decrease in the roughness as you increase the concentration of surfactants that are added to the water. And this result is consistent with the radar measurements that we're making from the satellite. So we're developing kind of a physics-based model for this roughness anomaly. So what we're doing next, right now this summer, there's two different campaigns going on in the North Pacific Gyre, the North Pacific Garbage Patch, one by the Ocean Voyager research vessel and another by a fleet with the Ocean Cleanup based in the Netherlands. And we're working with both of these groups. They're making measurements of the microplastics as validation for our satellite retrievals. We're continuing with the wave tank experiments. We've also expanded our technique to other satellites that operate at higher latitudes to look at the distributions of microplastics away from the gyres and further north and further south. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kurt. What an outstanding research. We will now shift from space research to the deep sea. And our next speaker is Professor Alan Jamison, the Oceans Institute and the School of Biological Sciences at the University of Western Australia, and the founding director of the Minderoo-UWA Deep-Sea Research Centre. He has over 20 years of experience in deep-sea science, technology, and exploration. Professor Alan has participated in nearly 70 deep-sea expeditions spanning every ocean and has deployed weighted camera systems over 500 times throughout the world's deepest trenches. Thanks for joining us, Alan, and time and screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you all see that okay?
Yeah, you can see it.
So my research group, as was just said, is based out of Perth, Australia, and my particular research focus has always been the ecology and biology of the deepest places on the planet. And the word deep sea is a phrase that's used a lot, and it means everything and nothing because most of planet Earth is deep sea. But in this context, we are talking about the very deepest points on the planet and in each ocean. And we do that through a series of autonomous vehicles. And more recently, in the last few years, we've been doing a lot of diving in a submersible. So we can actually now descend with relative ease down to 11 kilometers underwater. And my research has normally been of biological nature, but over the years, it's become apparent that we can no longer ignore the plastic problem because we see it all the time. It's part of the ecosystem now. And what surprises a lot of people is just how much of it we're finding in some of the most remote parts of the planet. And I think there's almost two ways to look at this. Is the visibility of the problem normally means the harm is low, but with harm to the environment gets really, really concerning is when the problem is almost invisible. So what I'll do is I'll start off with some of the bigger, more obvious things that we see and work down into a smaller one. So some things we find in the deep ocean are actually put there deliberately. These images here are taken from the deepest point on Earth. They're from 10,925 meters in the Mariana Trench near Guam. And these are fiber optic cables, which have been deliberately discarded from undersea vehicles. We won't go into too much detail about why they're there, but these things are tens or hundreds or maybe even thousands of meters long. They're covered in plastic and they're just going to slowly break down. And they're accumulated in a very small place. And
interrupting.
Yep.
Yes. Sorry. Would you like to make it in the presenter view so we can see your screen now?
It is. Sorry, it is.
Yeah.
Right. Hold on. I'll just do it this way. Is that better? I'll just do it that way. I don't know why that's
so in the presenter view. Because we haven't seen it in the full screen yet.
Oh, so that's not in the presenter view then?
Yeah, it hasn't been in the presenter view yet.
Oh, okay. All All right, I don't know why it is, because it is on my computer. Okay, let's just.
All right, that's better.
Just go with that. All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so these are undersea fiber optic cables that have been deliberately discarded across this particular area, and they're used to transmit data and power various undersea vehicles. So these are now so bad that it means that the place where humans first ever got to the deepest point on Earth is now a no-go zone, because these are such a tango hazard. They're that bad. There's so many of them, it's unreal. And then we've got other things, like, for example, these are some images from our submersible. The top left is the deepest point in the Indian Ocean near Indonesia. We've even got the deepest point in the Arctic Ocean. There's a big chunk of plastic up there. Deepest point in the Atlantic. And that last one there is quite poignant. I think this is taken from the middle of the East Indian Ocean. And it's a plastic bottle sitting on a manganese nodule field, which rather beautifully illustrates all the things we shouldn't put in the ocean and all the things we shouldn't be taking out. And then we have, what does the plastic do? People keep asking, okay, it's there, what does it actually do? So it does various harm on various levels. And the thing we've been finding recently is every time we dive to the deepest points, we see these scars on the seafloor, these almost like train tracks. And what that is essentially is plastic bags coming down, and before they become buried and settled and stop, they basically start eroding away the seafloor. And that microtopography of the seafloor is really important to a lot of the smaller animals. So they're basically altering the habitat by eroding away all the tracks and burrows and the oxygen and particular organic matter dynamics of the deep sea. And animals do interact with it. So this is some frame grabs from a video we took at 7,300 meters in the San Cristobal Trench near the Solomon Islands. And this particular shrimp came to our baited camera already holding what looks like a lollipop stick. You can see that the arrows are pointing out. It took a while to work out what was happening, and it's holding this thing like it's a toy. And it comes across our bait, and it has some sort of dilemma trying to work out if it's going to eat, it's going to have to drop the stick. And eventually it does. And about half an hour later, two other animals came along and picked it up and took it away somewhere. So the animals are interacting with this stuff. When it gets really serious is when you start looking inside these animals. So this is an example here of a small crustacean from the bottom of Challenger Deep, Mariana Trench. And we found that they are in the Mariana Trench, the deepest point in the world. Every single animal we looked at had at least one piece of plastic in its stomach. We looked at 6 of the deepest trenches in the world, and let's say the cleanest place was off Vanuatu, where only 50% had at least one piece of plastic in its stomach. So it's quite a sobering study to try and do. And sometimes these microplastics don't look that big, but when you put it alongside an animal which is only 5 or 10 millimeters long, it must be quite significant. And one of the questions we quite often get asked is, well, what harm is it doing? And it's very difficult for us because we know that the plastic in the deep sea is only going to get more and more of a problem, because once it starts to sink, there's nowhere else for it to go. It's only ever going to accumulate. So all the stuff we see in the surface right now is going to come down. Now, as you go down with depth, the opportunity to work out what it's doing to the animal diminishes, because we cannot study these animals alive. We cannot bring the animals in that photograph to the surface and do a study on what happens when they start to ingest plastic. So there becomes a problem, is that we can watch this stuff happen, but we can't necessarily right now understand the harm that it's doing. We did recently, just before the pandemic, we discovered a new species of amphipod from Mariana Trench, and we found it already had plastic in its stomach. So we decided to name it Plasticus, because it was the most distinguishing morphological feature it had, was it was already contaminated. And we decided to use that as a tool for good. And we teamed up with WWF and an advertising agency in Germany, and we had a reach of 1.4 billion people, and it was quite a significant campaign. And it was nice to see, it was nice to see some of the deep animals up there, and it was also nice to know that we're having some sort of impact. And it managed to get through 93 countries in the end, which was great. And then as the visibility gets less and less and less, we do have hints at what this stuff might be doing. So we know that PCBs and plasticizers are bad. They tend to reduce the reproductive success of crustaceans. Now, PCBs are plasticizers. They're banned now. They were made in the 1950s. They were banned by the 80s, but the ocean's full of them now, as are some of the early generation flame retardants. And what we know is these things are hydrophobic. So they bind to stuff in the water and they bind to plastic like a magnet. So it's orders of magnitude more PCBs around a plastic particle than an organic particle. So if we know that microplastics are inside these animals, there's a very high probability that the PCBs are. So we analyzed this and we found in the Mariana Trench, the PCB contamination of the animals was 15 times higher than some of the most polluted rivers in China. And this is the place which is supposed to be the ultimate, most pristine part of the planet. So that was very sobering as well. And one of the other points I'd like to make at the end here was when we had some of the plastics from the stomachs of the deep sea animals analyzed to see what it was, our experts tell us that it's a lot of them look like very early generation textile synthetics, which at one respect is like, okay, so this stuff is relatively old. It may be something that was produced early on in the 60s and 70s. But that suddenly becomes horrifying when you think that means that all the other stuff we've produced since has yet to arrive. So if things are bad now, think of what they're going to be in 20, 30 years. And the next stage is for us to, we're going to keep working on this and keep monitoring this. And ultimately, I just wanted to show this image. These are all deep sea animals from the Indo-Pacific. And, you know, we know very little about the life history of any of these animals, but we know full well that they're already being exposed to plastics and contamination associated with plastics. So we do generally have a big problem. But the point I wanted to get across today was just to get that message that this stuff is genuinely everywhere. So thank you very much. Stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Professor Allen. That is such an insightful ideas that we have heard from you. And also, I would like to thank you to all of the speakers. They had some fascinating and very interesting insights to share. I'll run a quick Q&A session to address any questions that you have for our speakers so far. But don't worry, we will also have a Q&A later also. To facilitate the session, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Deborah. Deborah is from the CSIRO and is the Ending Plastic Waste Mission Lead. Thanks, Deb, for joining us.
Thank you, Felia, and thank you to our speakers for your fascinating presentations. We have a 10-minute Q&A session now, and I'd like to invite all of the participants on the call to have a look at their Q&A function on the right-hand side. Think about some questions for our speakers that you might like to ask them. We actually only have the opportunity to ask Chris questions in this session, not at the end session of this webinar, because of the time. He really needs to leave us, and we appreciate him being here at this particular time. So we have a couple of questions lined up, and for you, Chris, firstly, the question is really, why would plastic concentrations be higher in summer? Are you able to speak to that?
Right. So this is a hypothesis. I have an idea of why it's happening. We haven't really tested it yet. But in general, in the winter, the winds are higher. There's a steeper temperature gradient in the water near the surface, and there's more vertical mixing of the surface water with deeper water, and that would be consistent with what we're seeing. I don't think the plastics aren't going away. All we see are the manifestation of the plastics right at the surface within the first few centimeters. Probably is what's really affecting the roughening. So it's being distributed at greater depths so that the concentration at the surface is lower in the winter, and then it comes back in the summer. I think that's what's happening.
Okay, that would be great to hear more about the research that you're following up there, and whether that hypothesis is substantiated. Fascinating, thank you. So Rebecca, there's a question here for you, asking a bit about what inspires you and what is motivating you to reduce plastic waste. And then a second follow-up question to that is, what do you do yourself to limit your own plastic use?
I think what inspires me through Plastic Free July is really it's the same thing as what gives me hope. It's seeing those stories that I shared some of in my presentations. It's seeing the changes that people are making and seeing that growing and being elevated all of the time. So seeing the solutions and the conversations switching to consider all material types, to consider transitions to the circular economy. It started out very much at the individual level, but now, as I said, it's organisations of all shapes and sizes. And in our recent newsletter, we were just finding out about NASA, for example. They do it every year as a staff engagement piece, which I didn't know about. So it's great to hear those stories. I think I'm definitely not plastic free in our family and our home. We've probably reduced our plastic by about 60 to 70%. It's an ongoing project for me. Beyond July, it's something I try and make as a way of life. But the lovely thing about July is it's just a moment every year to do better, to learn more. And it's been also really great to see solutions, say products like a bamboo toothbrush or a beeswax wrap that 10 years ago weren't even on the market, or if they were, you had to order them online. Now we see those kinds of items, or a solid shampoo bar, so many more items that don't contain single-use plastic on our supermarket shelves. So that's been a heartening change to see.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Really agree with you. We really do see that availability of new options that's out there in the marketplace, and so it does facilitate that transition for people to make those choices. Thanks, Rebecca. And so we have a question for you, Alan, and it's a really curious one. Interested in what you would say is the strangest thing that you found on the seafloor.
Strangest thing. An eco-friendly plastic bag. I think that was one of the ones that I found was quite peculiar. We were driving in a submarine at 10,000 meters on the Philippine Trench, and the plastic bag floated past the submarine with an eco-friendly sticker on the side of it. And I was thinking, maybe that's not so eco-friendly after all. So that was a strange one.
Yeah. Interesting. And as a bit of a follow-up to that, you just mentioned going down to extraordinary depths. Do you get scared venturing down that far?
Nah, it's fine. I think it maybe takes people of a certain disposition to do it, but it's actually quite pleasant. It's small and it's confined, so it's not for the claustrophobic. But in terms of the descent down and the time there, it's actually strangely graceful. And when you see the seafloor, when you see animals that no human being has ever seen before, it's quite humbling. It's almost majestic, I think. From the outside looking in, it looks like a crazy thing to do, but it's actually very enjoyable.
Oh, it sounds extraordinary, and a completely unique environment. And I suppose it's a comparison that a lot of people make, as it would be sort of the feeling of traveling into outer space. So,
yeah, I mean, there's something really quite unique about it. Certainly when you're going up and down in the water column, you can see a lot of things running past the camera, and you see a lot of bioluminescence. So if you switch the lights off, you can see how much light is being produced in the water column, and things like that are really quite unique. It's difficult to even put into words what that feels like to see it.
It's also a privilege then. Very fortunate to be able to do that work.
Yeah, that's good fun. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Alan. So we have another question for Chris, and the question is that there are significant microplastic outflow events that happen in certain weeks from the Yangtze. So was this type of super event happening with any of the other major rivers that you were aware of? Do you know what the catalyst is?
Yeah, So our satellites cover from about 38 degrees north to 38 degrees south latitude. And we kind of systematically went through all the major rivers in that region, which is most of them, and did the same sort of analysis as we did with the Yangtze. And we see outflow that's from all of them. And it's not consistent, it's episodic, like with the Yangtze. The Yangtze is the one that was by far the strongest of any of the rivers we looked at. But, you know, we looked at we saw it in the Mississippi, we saw it in the Amazon, we saw it in the Ganges, you know, all the major rivers have it.
Oh, thank you, Chris. And so we have a question for you, Rebecca, and interested in your thoughts about what you think the best alternative is in terms of packaging materials.
Oh, that's a challenging question to answer. So, I mean, I'd have to say from the outset, less packaging is and reducing packaging and switching to refillables and reusables where we can, I think is the best option. I mean, I think that there will be a role for plastics. The challenge is keeping that in a circular economy and also making sure that it is circular. So I know from my role in the container deposit scheme here in Western Australia, we're getting very good prices for some of the material types in for our recycling of beverage containers, such as aluminium and PET. The liquid paperboard, for example, we get very low prices and have to ship to the other, you know, we're shipping that to Spain. So I think, you know, I do think that from a packaging perspective, there is a role for plastics, but not all plastics are equal. So using polymers that are single polymers rather than different types of packaging or different material types for the one piece of packaging, use of recycled content are the really critical things to be looking at, because, you know, everything is going to have an impact. And whilst, you know, glass is more inert, for example, it does have a bigger footprint in terms of its transport. So it really depends on the context and the situation.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, really important points there around there not being one single solution, multiple solutions depending on the context. Thank you. And just a final one for this session, a final question for you, Alan. Interested in your thoughts about why you think there's a time lag a time lag for the organisms having plastics identified in their stomachs, and then following on from that, thinking there's a huge concentration of plastics accumulating today, and how concerning will this be in terms of future impact?
I think the lag is a couple of things. One is, I guess it takes time to break down, and most plastics float, so you need a lot of microbial action or UV degradation to try and take some of the hydrocarbons out of the plastic to give it enough negative buoyancy to sink. Plus, the currents beyond the top few hundred meters are actually quite benign, so it's just taking time to get down. But the thing that gets me is just the sheer scale. I mean, we're probably all pretty aware now. You turn the globe to the Pacific, and all of that is 4,500 meters deep, pretty much. So it's spreading out, and it's taking time to get down, and it's just that one step behind. What was the second part of the question? Sorry, I've forgotten already.
It was, given there's an accumulation of plastics growing at a vast rate currently, what do you think the consequences will be?
I think it can only ever get worse. If you think about the Mariana Trench as like an inverted mountain range, it's about the same volume as the Himalaya, right? So it's big, and Challenger Deep represents the top of Mount Everest, but it's not a channel. It's not like a river or a coastline or something which, if you were to stop putting plastic in right now, it would all just eventually flush out and dilute to the point where, one day maybe it's all gone away. But when you get to deep sea, there's no mechanism for that to happen. It's not going to get diluted. It's not going to get washed away. It's not going to be cleaned. It's just going to pile up and up and up and up and up. And then it becomes quite a significant part of that environment, because you're now in an environment where you have almost a completely locked in food web. That there's no animal that lives at the bottom of the trench and comes up shallower, and there's no animals that are shallower that go down. So once that material and that contamination is there, it's then in the system, and it'll go round and round in circles, and it'll only get worse. That's the kind of frightening thing, is the consequences of that.
Yes, that's something to contemplate and consider, the gravity of that. Thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Chris. We'll pass back to you now, Felia.
Thank you so much, Deb, for all of your questions so far. We will have another opportunity towards the end of our webinar to address further questions. So please keep submitting your questions via the question function. I would like now to hand over to Dr. Prabhakar Mishra. Dr. Mishra is a scientist from the National Centre for Coastal Research, Government of India. He's leading the Marine Litter and Microplastics program and is coordinating marine litter-related research activities. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Mishra. The time and screen is yours.
Thank you. Good day to all of you. I think I'm clear and audible.
Yep, you're audible.
Yeah, I'm going to share my Is it visible?
Yeah, it looks good now. Yeah, it is.
I think it is in presentation mode. Yeah?
Yeah, it's already in the presenter view.
Okay, thank you. So, morning session, we are, the first session, we are listening to fantastic talk of all the participants. So let me tell you, I was asked to, actually, we had a meeting on the ES Marine Plastic Debris Workshop on 14th and 15th February 2022. And I was asked to make a summary of the this workshop. And as we see that in the morning session, this first, Dr. Tunusha mentioned that with the ES Summit and the ES Marine Plastic Workshop, the genesis of this workshop started with when all the foreign ministries of all the countries, they started 18 ES member countries. They thought of the challenges faced by the marine plastic pollution. Then the foreign ministry, under the aegis of the foreign ministry of Singapore, India, and Australia, and with the organizing partner of a National Centre for Coastal Research from the Ministry of Earth Science, and from the Australia, the CSIRO, and from the Singapore National Environmental Agency, we organized a workshop, and to basically this workshop to find out with 4 sessions, and to understand that how we can collaborate, how these countries can collaborate and can curb the menace of this plastic pollution, and what should be the recommendation, and there should be some recommendations, and we can work on that. So in the workshop, there was about 154 people registered, but 100 people participated, and there are from 13 countries the stakeholders of the participants. And the 4 sessions, under the 4 sessions, that is magnitude of the marine litter problem right now, what is the best practices that to prevent the plastic pollution, and the polymers and plastic technology and innovations and opportunity for regional collaborations. And the participants, among the participants, the major group belong to the scientists or researchers or public officers and diplomats. And this is what the total the composition of the participants. And the workshop, the introductory remark was given by Dr. Ravichandran, the Secretary of the Ministry of Art Sciences of the Government of India, as well as Mr. Jonathan Law, the Executive Director, Growth of CSIRO, Australia, and Mr. Angshe Singh, who is the Deputy Secretary of Ministry of Sustainability and Environment. And all the three, the introductory note, they stressed that collaborative actions for combating marine plastic debris is essential as it is transboundary in nature. And from the last two talks, what we understand that the ocean from the top of the ocean to the Marina Trench, to the deepest part of the earth, as well as on the top of Himalayas, we have seen the presence of plastics. So now it is the right time to the gravity of the marine plastics debris we should understand, and a collective and cooperation action is necessary. And this session one, for session wise we had discussions, and in the session one, that is the magnitude of the marine litter. So what exactly the key takeaway is that this was actually dealt by the experts from Australia, Ms. Dr. Harstein, Professor Ishobe from Japan, Dr. Maitra from India, Dr. Jirapon from Thailand, and Mrs. Rita Kumari from Malaysia. And all of them, they talked in different aspects of the problem. So the main impacts, Dr. Harstein stressed on the main impact areas of plastic pollutions, environment, economy, and social health, and what is the local-based solution required to tackle the issue. And the key takeaway for is that these are some of the key takeaways from the talk, that waste leakage is very important. Similarly, the Professor Ishobe talked on the monitoring methods and microplastic data collections, and he stressed that data sharing of microplastics, that is the need for the time. And we must say, in the open source database systems should be made so that all countries can access, and we can have more research on that. Similarly, the Dr. Maitra, she talked about identifying the source high plastic density areas, and how to assess how to curb the plastic leakage, and who we need to fix the responsibility, like the supplier, from the producer to the supplier chain, and take necessary actions against the change in plastic use. And it is very important that we should also create the attitude of the public. Dr. Jirapon very specifically talked on the Thailand government's problem and private sector, how they're taking actions on to address the problem, and the histories from that the local management is very important, and that is the very important issue right now. Means this may be for every year. Similarly, Mrs. Rita Kaur, she talked on the Malaysian issue, applications of finding to inform policy decision makings, and initiatives required for local, regional, and national level, as well as international level. So national marine litter policy plan can come out, and the action plan can come out that can work out. And session 2 was something like the best practices to prevent plastic pollution. And here experts from India, Dr. Thukral, and Myanmar, Mrs. Han, Mr. Mengying from Cambodia, Mrs. Meeding from Singapore, and Mr. Morishita from Japan. They talked on what are the practices right now is required and to prevent these pollutions. And they also talked about the country cases. So the best, it was found that the best thing is, as we are discussing, eco-friendly products, including recycled plastics, as well as it is very important that we need some of the in some of the cases, like challenges, lack of data, financial resources, adequate infrastructure, and some of the people stressed on the international collaboration is crucial. Similarly, Japanese Mr. Morishita, he talked on that management of waste, recovery of marine litter, innovations and empowerment. That is the marine initiative Japan has already initiated. That is Japan's view under the Japan's blue ocean vision. And the Singapore, they have already started regulating industry reporting. On the basis of regulated industry reporting, and the Cambodia, Mr. Minging, he stressed on that the education and awareness are the important points that to shift to create large-scale awareness among people and power to change the public attitude. The third session talked on that is basically talked on the polymers and plastics and technology and innovations and the key takeaways. And Dr. Gretchen from New Zealand and Mr. John Angin from USA talked on the role of technology as well as the new model of waste collection system, sorting, processing a case of USAID, USAID Clean Cities, Blue Oceans. And they stress that the circular system of economy, because the new plastic economy depends on the 6R, that is refuse, reuse, rethink, recycle, and replace. And mostly the circular system is essential and involvement of industry is necessary. At the same time, Mr. John and Jean stress on that the network development, how you are going to develop your networking system and improve system for solid waste management, as well as building larger circular economy is very important and essential point. The session 4, that was somewhat the sort of panel discussion or opportunity for regional collaborations. A talk was discussed, and it was attended by, it was basically the speakers were from the CSIRO Australia, BD Hurstay, Mr. U.S. Siddiq from the Directive Waste Solid Waste Reductions Production System, Dr. P. Mishra, myself, Dr. B. Bonley, and Dr. F. Gretchen, as well as Dr. Tukral from India. So the best practices, the concluding remarks, almost all the speakers, they came to a conclusion that the best practices in reducing, eliminating waste is that the data is very important, the sharing of data, as well as the biggest challenges, that is public awareness and capacity building, is very much required. And effective data management, as stressed by the Japanese scientists, as the data collection system should be improved, and there should be the sharing of data, as well as the education across the entire supply chain, industry, government, and consumers. We should see that few waste as resources that enable us to have economic model, and there must be a circular economy in place, and the technology, new technology, and how to clean the ocean right now. The problem, as well as the new technology to innovate, to recycle and reuse of plastics, is very much essential. And with this, the feedback from the participants, we got that 35% of the participants, they were in the view that effective monitoring and system research is very much necessary, and 23% were in the best practices on reducing elementary waste. But the policy planning initiative and zero waste management planning, there is a very less participants give their feedback. But as a whole, if you look at that, it seems that somewhere or the other, the research and the educations are the very important points that needs to be focused for this. And in the closing remarks, the Joint Secretary and the ME of India, gave a message that this forum may be an opportunity forward to take forward the objectives of IPOY and discuss the issue of common interest, and that can we can make a collective, means we can make a collective decisions, and we can have a better cooperation among us, and we can somehow we can tackle the present I can say the plastic pollution to definitely to some extent. With that, I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mishra, for the insightful presentation. I would now like to introduce to you Dr. Christina. Christina Shaw is the CEO of the Vanuatu Environmental Science Society, which she started in 2014 after completing a master's in veterinary conservation medicine. The organization's main focus is protecting Vanuatu's threatened and endemic species, such as Vanuatu's flying foxes and dugongs, as well as important ecosystems. Dr. Christina will provide us with some insights to challenges of plastics in Vanuatu. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you very much for that introduction and for the opportunity to present on tackling the marine plastic pollution problem from the perspective of Vanuatu. Sorry. Right. Okay. So in case there's people on the call that don't know where Vanuatu is, I put up this map. So we are a small island nation in the South Pacific, just a 3-hour plane ride away from Australia. We are an island nation made up of 86 volcanic islands and have a population of just over 300,000 people. So we are a small country. But even as a small country, we have a problem with plastics ending up in our oceans and contributing to the global problem in our connected oceans. We are a net importer of goods, and most of what we import, if it's not made of plastic, it's packaged in plastic. And it's estimated that well over half of the plastics that come into our country do not end up being disposed of in formal waste management facilities. But we also have plastic arriving on our shores from the ocean, particularly fishing gear. I don't think I've been to any village in the far north of Vanuatu where you don't see a hammock made out of a purse seine net or longline buoys hanging up in the trees as decoration. And the leakage of the plastics into our environment is exacerbated because many of the people do not have access to formal waste management. The only government waste collections are within the municipalities in our only 2 urban centres. But 78% of people don't live in the urban centres. So what do they do with their rubbish in the rural areas? Their only choice is to either bury, burn, or dispose of it in the ocean. And most of it is actually buried, but as people live very close to the coast, even the plastics in these informal dumps can end up in the ocean, particularly as we're exposed to a lot of cyclones and storms, which can cause the coastal erosion and can wash out some of these informal dump sites. And that's probably going to get worse with climate change. There's also currently no plastic recycling in Vanuatu at the moment, although this is something that we're working very hard on to try and change in the very near future. So what are we doing about the plastic problem in Vanuatu? Well, VES, my small local organisation, has been collecting cleanups since 2015, and we're gathering data. We don't have the resources in our small local NGO that other people presenting today, such as CSIRO or NASA have. We can count the number of staff that we have on one hand. But even small organizations have a role to play. And being a small organization, what I have found is it's really useful to participate in some of the global programs that are going on. We are the country coordinator for the International Coastal Cleanup. It means we don't have to reinvent the wheel on how to do cleanups and what is the most important data to collect. And that also means that our data that we do collect is not only useful locally, but it can also contribute to the global data set in a compatible way. So encouraging local people to get involved is a great educational tool to demonstrate the problem. People are always surprised how much litter is on our beaches and coastline. And it also really clearly shows what the most problematic items are in a particular area that you're cleaning up. And what has we done with our data? Well, the data, even though it's a pretty small data set and it's derived from citizen science, so might not be quite as robust as some of the scientists around the world would like, but it is useful even as it is. Rather than having no data at all, it is useful to have something. And it has been used to support the plastic bans that came into effect in 2018 and 2019. We were the first country in the world to ban plastic straws. In the first phase of the ban, which included the plastic straws, we also banned plastic shopping bags, single-use plastic shopping bags, and the polystyrene clamshells that are often used as takeaway containers. And then a second ban came into effect the following year, including single-use plastic cutlery, plastic cups, egg cartons, and also artificial plastic flowers. There was also plans to put a ban on disposable nappies, but the COVID pandemic seems to have caused a lot of disruption to lots of different programs, and that ban has been put on hold for now. So we're working now with the ANZPAC Plastic Pact and quite a lot of other initiatives as well that have that are coming in as projects to the country. They also highlighting the plastic problem has made the private sector really quite engaged in Vanuatu. A lot of the private companies are relatively small family-run businesses. For example, some of the beverage manufacturers here, and they really are aware that their products are causing the pollution and want to do something about it. So we're trying to work towards creating a collection system because, as I said before, there's no recycling in Vanuatu, and there's no separated, even in those urban centres where there is waste collection, there is no separation of waste. And so there is no system for collecting recyclables. So that's what we think is the biggest challenge that we're working on right now. And we'll also continue to advocate on reducing plastics and giving value to plastics so they don't become waste. But I think what I really wanted to emphasize in my presentation is that it doesn't really matter how small you are. You can still play a part and make a difference. In our small market in Vanuatu, we can't dictate what packaging we import or even how it's labelled. And scale and remoteness is very challenging for us to start recycling. But we can be in the conversations and part of the solution as long as we work together and collaborate. And the solutions that we need in Vanuatu won't be exactly the same as in Asia or Australia. We're starting from a very different place, and we might have to end up in a different place to everyone else as well. But I think as the workshop participants pointed out, that international collaboration is key in solving this global problem, and even small countries and small organizations and even individuals can play a part and a role in coming up with those solutions and implementing them. So that's all I have for my presentation. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk from a different perspective from some of the other people in the presentation.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing those, China. Our last speaker for today is Mr. Zephaniah Nawaz, Director General for the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, or known as SPREP. Mr. Nawaz has worked in the environment sector in the Pacific Islands for over 30 years. And thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Nawaz.
Thank you, moderator. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. I especially want to thank Christina, who spoke from the Vanuatu NGO, because she's made my job much easier by presenting the situation in Vanuatu. What she presented is essentially the same in most other Pacific Island countries. SPREP is the intergovernmental organization that's responsible for environment in the Pacific. All of the Pacific Island countries and territories are members, and through them we are responsible for an area of ocean that's the equivalent of the US, Canada, and China combined. So it's a huge responsibility. But at the same time, as was conveyed in Christina's presentation, we have very limited resources, very limited capacity. Plus, the biggest issue is that most of the issues or most of the problems start from outside our region. So a lot of the things that we do, doesn't matter if we do it well, we need to connect with those outside our region to address and try and solve the issue. Most Pacific Island countries bring in around 80 or 90% of what they use from abroad. And a lot of it is packaged with plastic. A lot of it is plastic itself. And together with that is, with our small size, both in land area and in population and economies, our options for very limited. So I just wanted to give that as a context of what we deal with in our countries. It doesn't mean that we allow that to restrict us in what we try and do. Most countries like Vanuatu have legislation in place to either ban or manage or control the use of plastics, in particular single-use plastic. Some have gone on to styrofoam and other types of packaging. But the challenge still remains that most of the stuff that comes in from overseas is still packaged that way. One of the things that was also raised by Christina was the need to improve a lot of the infrastructure and services that our countries have. That we have been helping up governments and together with donors over the last 20 years. But one of the escalating challenges that we find is the issue of disaster waste. We are now increasingly having bigger and bigger magnitude cyclones and storms, and the waste that's associated with it in the cleanup basically overruns a lot of the improvements in infrastructure that have been made. Vanuatu is a classic example where we had worked with the Japanese to improve the landfill in Port Vila. But then they had Cyclone Pam, and basically that what had become almost a landfill, proper sanitary landfill, degraded back into a dump because it just couldn't cope with the sheer volume of waste that came associated with the cleanup after that, I think it was a magnitude 5 cyclone. What I'm trying to get at here is that when we look at these issues, we cannot look at them in isolation. We need to look at them along with the other big environmental issues, including climate change and what was raised in Alan's presentation, biodiversity, of waste and biodiversity. One of the things that we have been doing here at SPREP is helping our member governments try and put in place activities and actions that they can take at the national level. We've also provided a platform regionally where we can agree on our regional positions when we go into international negotiations, such as we were quite vocal with the issue of waste and marine litter and marine plastics. The UN Environment Assembly, where the Pacific was a strong voice to call for a global instrument on plastics that is now been approved and that we're all working towards. What we are now doing in that regard is we're preparing our countries to take effective action and participation in the intergovernmental negotiation process. That will be starting in late November in Ecuador, and we are hosting a preparatory meeting for Pacific countries next month, mid next month, where we will talk about how we need to put our points and our needs forward so that it's addressed through this legal instrument that we'll be negotiating over the next 2 years. I thank the findings from both Ellen and also the University of Michigan, because they will help the case. When you go into these negotiations, some of the arguments you need to make need to speak to the intellect, but what we find is very effective is when you are able to speak to the heart of people. And some of the statements made by, or the findings in Ellen's work, I think speak to that concern that we need to get people to have from a personal level. If this, if it's affecting the creatures that are down so deep, which we thought were in pristine environments, then it must be a lot worse in the upper levels of the sea and on the surface, where a lot of this is already apparent, even in the most remote islands in the Pacific. One of the other things that we have been trying to do is to provide network and frameworks and platforms where governments can interact with the private sector and NGOs and the CSOs. This is not an issue that governments alone can address. It needs to be addressed by all in society. And through these platforms, we've agreed on a cleaner Pacific framework that all of our members and our civil society and NGOs work towards. There's a network of practitioners that are involved in implementing this, and it's something that we will continue to have. And the final one that I want to get at is the need for increased private sector engagement. We have a very successful partnership here with Suez Shipping, where they provide free shipping of waste. Moanataka partnership, free shipping of waste outside from the Pacific, outside the region, to where it can be processed and disposed of safely. Those were my reflections on the presentations and the discussion that has been had. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nawaz, for the fruitful response. We will now have another Q&A session. We have covered so much today, so I'm sure we still have lots of interesting questions from our audience. I will hand over to Dapla once again to facilitate the Q&A session and to close out our webinar. Dr. Dapla, the time is currently yours.
Well, thank you again, Felia. And thank you again to our second tranche of speakers, Dr. Mishra, Dr. Christina Shaw, and Dr. Zephaniah. Really deep insights into the diversity and the complexity of the plastic pollution issue that we're dealing with. We do have some questions that are coming through for all of our speakers still, and so I'd ask you to perhaps put your cameras back on so we can work through some of those. So firstly, for you, Christina, do you have any data about the amount of plastics coming to Vanuatu through ocean flow? Specifically, not discharging from Vanuatu, but coming reversely from the surroundings. Do you have any metrics around what's coming in and what is being generated locally?
No, I'm afraid. So like a lot of the issues, the data is a problem. So as far as I'm aware, there has been no qualification of where the source of like the materials coming from on our beaches. We do have a program with the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, who is conducting research in Vanuatu, and at the moment we are helping them verify a model for identifying where hotspots for fishing gear is likely to be. But we haven't got any quantitative data of how much is accumulating in those areas. So there is a little bit of research going on, but at this point in time, we don't know how much is coming onto our shores. We don't get as much in Vanuatu as, for example, the Solomons and countries a little bit further north, a little bit closer to the equator to get on their shores, to do with the current flows. Mostly the current flows from east to west, and where the large fishing fleets are tends to be a little bit further north than us. So certainly the Solomons gets a lot more than we do. Our most northern islands gets some, but yeah, we don't have any quantitative data, I'm afraid. I can't answer that question any more than that, I'm afraid.
No, that's great. Thank you, Christina. I appreciate the magnitude of the challenge there. Okay, so we have a question for Alan again. You showed a really interesting photograph of a plastic bottle on blue balls, dark balls under the ocean. There was a question about what those dark balls are.
Those are manganese nodules. So those are what, I don't know if people are familiar with what's going on at the moment in terms of deep sea mining. These are nodules that form over millions and millions of years. They grow about a centimeter diameter for every million years. So those balls are about 8 to 10 million years old. And they're full of things like cobalt. And at the moment, there's a big push in the electric car industry for battery power. And to make these batteries to supply the world with battery, they need cobalt. And there's a big, huge, controversial, contentious thing going on between scientists and industry about whether or not to strip the deep sea of these nodules. So it's a devastating thing to do to the deep sea, but so the argument is whether or not it's worth it or not, and how to do it, and whether we can do it sustainably, or if at all. It's a whole other webinar. It's deep sea mining. So those are manganese nodules, and they only grow between 4,000 and 6,000 meters deep, and they only grow where there is Antarctic bottom water feeding into it. So they're quite specific locations.
Interesting. And yes, fascinating and beautiful things under the ocean. Thanks, Alan.
Yeah.
And so, Professor Mishra, a question for you. Do you have any thoughts on how you might remove microplastic particles out of the ocean? There's a lot of discussion around cleanups for macroplastics, but just in terms of the microplastics, any thoughts in that space?
You mean some technology or microplastic, or what exactly? I didn't get your question.
Yeah, the question is quite general. It's really about, that we know that there are increasing volumes of microplastics entering the ocean. Do you have any thoughts on how to remove those, either at the source or down the track?
So let me tell you. So thing is like this, if I look at the Indian scenario, so as you know, there is a lot of, in the paper wrote by Jembeck in Science 2015, they told that the countries which are having major estuarine environment or major river systems. Like suppose you take the case of Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Irrawaddy. So they are bringing a lot of litter, which later can be disintegrated to microplastics. But later a paper come that minor rivers, the small rivers, they bring 80% of the litter to the ocean. So there is some sort of controversial, because there is no hypothetical. These are all hypothetical data. There is no so far there is no quantification. One point. Let us keep it aside. The second point, what I want to discuss. So microplastics come from the marine litter. I can say the plastics, which are being coming to the ocean system through rivers. So we need to have some system at the source. If you look at the source, that is basically on the land side. So single, like we are now going to ban this, like July 5th plastics, and India has already started from 1st July banning single use of plastics. But the problem is how we are going to contain our litter part at the landward side. And right now, what has gone to the environment already, it is in the environment. It is really a major task. I mean, so I cannot think of because it has gone to every I can say the part of the sediment, as I told you, so bottom sediment, as well as the surface water, as well as the entire volume, the depth of water column, and everywhere the microplastic is there. So it is impossible to remove them. Okay, but India has started like putting grass floats, I can say, that that is in the river systems, small river systems, canals, or you can say creek system, and collections of recycling of these major, I can say, major meso-size plastics, and collecting and recycle it. And so slowly, I think there will be an improvement, and that's what my answer. But microplastic, taking out the microplastic from the system, I think it is impossible right now. We can make research, we can quantify. Okay, we have done some, we have published some papers recently, we have quantified, but of the river, which area, hotspot area, but taking it out is impossible, I think. But okay, we should find out some source. I mean, how to manage or how to contain the litter part on the source side, instead of how we can make it not to enter to the ocean.
Yes, I think that. Thank you. I think there's general consensus that the cleanup is a perhaps insurmountable task, but turning it off at the source is really the approach that is going to be most effective. Thank you. And just finally, a question for Mr. Zephaniah, if you're still with us. Mr. Nawaz? Perhaps not with us.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. You've got your mic back on. That's great. So in your talk, you mentioned that you've got a really innovative program with Suez to take some of the waste and mobilize that. And this question has come through, and it goes back to the issue of producer responsibility. And it's really asking if you have any knowledge or if there's any programs around addressing the issue with input from oil companies and plastics manufacturers. Is that something that you're aware of, whether those programs are happening?
Yeah, there's some programs or initiatives already happening. This one is included, but this is more from a perspective of cleanup. But I think that's why it's really crucial to get this global agreement down, so that it becomes something that's regulated, something that applies across the whole globe. And then I think once that's done, then a lot of the private sector can then come on board. Because what usually happens is you have those that are the more corporately responsible who are already involved, but it's really the ones that you need to force into making the change that you need to address in a lot of cases. And the bigger industry will not move until it becomes an imperative that they do through regulation or making economic instruments, or if society just says this is no longer acceptable, and then that comes into play. But there are initiatives already in play. We have a container deposit return that a lot of private sector is involved with. That shipping one that I talked about, it's with Swire Shipping. They provide shipping free. As you know, most of the shipping into the Pacific comes in fully laden, but there's containers return empty. So instead of returning them empty, we fill them up with waste that can be taken to predetermined sites where they can be safely addressed. There's now global interest in that, and UNEP is working with Swire to now make it into a global shipping partnership with more shipping lines involved. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, a really innovative program, and capitalising on that wasted opportunity for movement if they're moving.
Just one more point.
Yes.
One more point, maybe.
Sure.
One thing that is increasingly coming up is the need to see waste as a resource. This whole circular economy issue that was raised by the Vanuatu NGO speaker, and I think that's another thing that we really need to facilitate and encourage. Thank you.
Definitely, wholeheartedly agree with you there, Zephaniah. Thank you. And thank you to all of our speakers today. I'm just going to make a few closing comments, and so I'm going to share my screen and just checking that that's coming through. Okay, thank you. Yes, and you know, just to reinforce, you know, our collective gratitude to all of the speakers today, because we've really seen, you know, the breadth of and the magnitude of the issue, and those speakers have really shared their knowledge and passion and expertise to help us understand in more depth the complexity of the situation. So really fascinating range of initiatives and research. And what we've heard today really actually highlights the magnitude of the issue, but the work that's happening here in Australia and around the Indo-Pacific region and globally is, you know, coming together to address that collectively. We know the problem for plastic pollution is growing globally. We know that it's anticipated to double by 2040, and we all recognise the urgency to develop solutions to actually reduce that plastic waste. So here at CSIRO, we're committed to that cause through our Ending Plastic Waste mission, and that mission has a goal of reducing 80% of plastic waste entering the environment by 2030. That's a bold and ambitious target, but it's really inspiring to have so many people here today who are committed to the issue, because we recognise it's only through combined efforts that we're going to be able to make the change that's needed. We know that science and technology are going to play a major part of that transition. And like we've heard today, such as using satellites and submarines to understand the plastic in our oceans and in the deep sea, that science and technology will be a large player in that innovation and that transition to a circular economy, which we just mentioned. And the critical part of the puzzle is really to stop it getting there in the first place, as we've recognised. And so our cross-disciplinary and international collaborations will really bolster that. Knowledge sharing through forums such as this, and developing new innovations to actually change the way we make, use and recycle and dispose of plastics. So we're really interested to hear a little bit more about your thoughts today. Really glad that you've joined us. And we'd love you to use the chat function that's on the right-hand side of your screen to let us know a little bit more about why you joined the webinar. Please pop your responses in the chat function about, what drove you to dial in, what was the motivation for you to hear more about the issue. And we'd love to hear more about what you'd like to hear from us on in the future, so that we can provide some focused and directed sessions to address those questions. So if you could just use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen, that'd be great to add those thoughts in. And just a quick mention here of the Plastics Innovation Hub Indonesia that's being led through partnership between the Indonesian government, Secretariat, CSIRO, and the Australian government, DFAT. You can hear more about some of those activities in the showcase day, which is where 11 teams will be pitching their ideas on how to tackle plastic pollution. And you can see what research could be further developed to create that real world impact. That showcase day is on the 11th of August online, and you can register using the QR code on the slide. And there's another element of the Plastics Innovation Hub in Indonesia, which is an accelerator program, which is designed to bring research ideas to market. So if you're a researcher, a startup, an SME, or an innovator, and you'd like to test your ideas for products, please register. Those registrations, those applications close on the 15th of August, and the program starts on the 30th. And again, you can find out more on the QR code there. And finally, a big thank you to you for participating, for our wonderful partners and absolutely inspirational speakers who joined us today with their thoughts and ideas. We've got a flavour of the plastic pollution issue across the globe, and we've really valued your contribution and your involvement. This event is an Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative-led regional event. Our co-hosts are the Indian National Centre for Coastal Research, the Indonesian Ministry of Education, Culture, Research and Technology, partnered with CSIRO and the Indo-Pacific Plastics Innovation Network. Big thanks to our brilliant MC, Faya Zumani from Cadarika in Indonesia. And thank you especially to our audience for dialing in today and for showing your interest in plastic waste, because we need that interest, that collective movement, that collective action to make a difference. Our recording will be made available in the coming week on the CSIRO Ending Plastic Waste Mission website, and we'll also be sending out a very quick survey on this webinar, so we'd be really grateful for your feedback. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye for now.